What is this? Why are these batteries connected in parallel? Is it safe? Is it dangerous? Today, I'm going to hopefully teach you everything you need to know about parallel charging and pretty much everything you need to know about lithium batteries so that you can charge them safely and potentially save yourself a bunch of time by charging them in parallel. This is kind of a scary thing for a lot of people, and we'll explain why and potentially the hazards, but also the benefits. So stick with me through the video and hopefully you'll learn something. I think you will. Alright, so this is my charging corner. I've got a bunch of different chargers, a bunch of different battery types, including Li-ion and Lipo, and I've got a couple parallel charging boards here. I'm going to try to crash course you through the Lipo and the battery safety before we get into parallel charging, and then how I'm going to do that when I come back from the flying field and how I would go about getting my batteries onto the parallel boards, which is ultimately what you guys are here for, saving yourself time and just getting your batteries charged safely. So first of all, let's go into the basic understanding of lipos. If you want a more in-depth talk about lipos, I can definitely do that, but this is going to be super basic. So you generally have lithium polymer batteries that you're dealing with. They're more of a square shape. This one's puffy, so don't just disregard that. And then you have lithium ion batteries. These batteries have a little bit more of a round shape. Now, the difference between the two is lithium polymer can generally handle more output power, so it can handle more overall amps being drawn in a short time frame. And then lithium ion can handle more duration, but not as much amp draw. So it's usually for a size to weight comparison. This is lithium polymer and this is lithium ion. These are about the same capacity, and notice that the lithium ion battery is a lot smaller, and also notice that the power lead is a lot smaller on the lithium ion, and it's an XT60, which supposedly can handle 60 amps max, and it's kind of the standard within the FPV community. And then this is an XT90 with some big beefy wires on here, which supposedly can handle 90 amps continuously going to the drone or whatever you're going to. So with that kind of basic understanding said, there is a difference between cell counts and batteries. So we have these batteries right here, which are big, and we have, let's see, one of these batteries, which is small. Both of these are 6-cell batteries. As you can see right here, there are 6 individual cells. They both have a similar balance lead. Both of these balance lead connectors are 7 pins, and the reason they're 7 pins is because for each one of these batteries, there has to be a power connection so that when you balance all of these batteries, aka balanced charging your batteries, you're essentially getting all of these batteries equally charged so that you don't just plug in here and say one battery is really low and one battery is really high, but it gives you the same overall voltage, and then you end up charging one battery super high and the other battery is just trying to catch up and it causes a fire. So again, we have a balanced lead. There's generally 7 connections for a 6S, and there's generally 5 connections for a 4S, like you see here. So that's a good way to understand like the size of the batteries and how many cells there are in there based on the balance lead. So you can dictate a little bit by like, oh, this is kind of a big battery, but this could just be a really big 2S. So the best way to determine is look at the balance lead. All right. So we have different sizes. These are 4S right here, different sizes and capacities. We have some 6Ss right here, and these are different sizes and capacities. This is a 6S as well. And a little bit of understanding for the safety of charging is knowing how much to charge the batteries. But we do need to understand how to decipher battery voltage and the capacity of the battery. So let's talk about this battery, for example, at 5,200 milliamps, and this one's a 1,400 milliamp battery. You can see the size difference. They're both 6S batteries, so they both have about 25.2 volts when they're fully charged, but the capacity is significantly different. This particular battery is going to last a lot longer than this battery. However, it's a lot heavier. So that's what you're taking in consideration. Not necessarily the cell count, but you're talking about the capacity and the overall fuel tank within the battery. If you want more fuel, you got to add a little bit more weight. If you want less fuel, you're losing a little bit of weight, but you can't fly as long. So just keep that in mind. Now, a cool thing that you can do with these is this is kind of like a basic math concept. If you want to determine how you can charge these batteries safely, they have this thing called a C rating, all right? You've probably seen it on batteries before. It'll say 110C or a 220C burst. Insane, highly unlikely. That would be 220 times 5.2 amp hours. How did I get 5.2 amp hours? Well, this is milliamp hours, and you remember from chemistry, you take away the M by putting that decimal place over 3 places. Now we have 5.2 amp hours, and technically this battery, it says it can do 220 times 5.2. That's basically what a C is. A C is the capacity in amp hours. That's how many amps it can draw. As far as, I mean, this one definitely cannot do that, because that would be like 150 amps continuous and then like 200 plus amps in burst. I could maybe see that for a couple seconds, but not for a prolonged period of time. And a burst is usually 10 to 15 seconds, so maybe it can. But yeah, like same thing on this. If we move that decimal place over 3 places, this would be at 1C at 1.4 amp hours. Now, they say this is a 331 C burst, or 331 amps, because, well, not 331 C, but 330 amps, I'm assuming. There's no indication back there. But basically, this thing can handle 150 amps for a small amount of time, essentially, but it can't handle the 200 plus that supposedly this battery can. So the smaller battery, the less amps you can output for as long a period of time, but obviously you kind of get a little bit of benefit by having it in a lightweight form. Now, let's go ahead and talk about why C rating is important, not necessarily for the output power of the battery, but also for the charging of the battery. We have a couple different sets of chargers here. We've got, this is an iCharger 406 Duo. This thing's been around for 12 years now. It's hooked to an HP freaking DC power output up there. This is from an old server. It's 1200 watts at 12 volts, and it comes into the back of this thing, and it can do a bunch of amps. Technically, if this were 24 volts, it could handle 40 amps at 6S on both channels, but that would be if I had a better power supply. So right now it can't. We have another charger over here. This is kind of a smaller charger. Supposedly can do 200 watts when it's plugged directly into the wall, or it can do 650 watts if you plug in via USB, or not USB, but via XT60. So technically, if I wanted to, and I had like a field battery, I could take this, plug it into the back, and now I could charge using my field battery. And because I'm already DC, I'm not having to do the conversion of AC at 120 volts here into a 12 volt DC power converter. I can actually just convert whatever this is into power, and it'll give me a little bit more output power because the wattage is higher. So technically this would give me more output power, but in most cases I don't necessarily need to do that because I'm not charging at high amp draw. I am going to charge at lower amp draw with a lot of batteries, and that's what we're going to get to in a second when we talk about the actual parallel charging. But I want to go over charging safely with a single battery beforehand. So again, these chargers, they can't handle as much output power, and they don't have, these are actually a banana connector. So this charger is kind of a little more modern and has an XT60 on the front. You can make connectors for XT30s if you want, and it's got this 6S balance lead plug. Yes, you can plug in 2S into the 6S balance lead plug. You can just put it on the right side there, and it gives me, oh, there's 2 cells there, but I would need a connector to make this JST work with that XT60 plug. But if I wanted to charge this 4S battery, same thing. I can still use that 6S plug even though it's keyed for 6S. You just stick it on the right, and it gives me 4 cells right there. So I'm good to go, and I could technically take this battery plug and stick it right there, and I could charge this 4S battery if I needed to. But I'm just showing you kind of the basics of batteries and, you know, how to charge them. Now, what kind of power do I want to charge these batteries at? Well, I want to charge them roughly between 1 and 2C of whatever the battery size is. So for example, this battery, I generally will charge them at 1C or a little over 1C, but I never go over 2C. And what that means is this battery at 1.4 amps, again, I take that decimal place over to 1.4 amps. That makes sense here because it's not reading in milliamp hours, it's reading in amp hours. So if I plug in here, I got 23 volts. I go in here and I click and I go to my amps, and technically right now it's set to 2.5, which is just under 2C. So I could go to 2.6, I'd multiply that by 2 and I'd get 2C at, you know, or sorry, wow, I can't math. Let's go to 2.8. Yep. 1.4 times 2 is 2.8. So 1.4 times 2 is 2.8. Yes, sorry, math was hurting my brain. So anyways, I could technically charge this battery at 2C at 2.8 amps. It's on Li-ion. I want to make sure it's on lithium polymer. And it would get my charge done in a little over half the time that it would take at 1C. So the C rating thing is not directly linear. If you charge at 1C, it'll take about 45 minutes. If you charge at 2C, it takes about 30, 32. And then at 3C, you're getting a little bit shorter in the 25 range. 4C, you know, you can charge batteries very quickly, but The problem comes down to these smaller batteries you can charge at 4C. You could not charge this at 4C because that would require you to be able to charge at 40 amps through this little charger, which it wouldn't do it. So that's when these bigger chargers come into play, when you need a lot of batteries. Some people have planes and helicopters that run these in series for 12S, and every single 3 to 5 minute flight burns 2 of these, and you want to charge them quickly, so you have a bunch of parallel boards and you run a big charger like this with a big power supply. So, but for smaller drone batteries, we're doing stuff like this, where we could technically charge this at 2 or 3C, and we could technically run, you know, 2 of them at a time and get the job done, and then we could swap it out and get the job done and swap them out and get the job done. Or we could buy multiple chargers and plug in 4 at a time and get the job done. It just depends on your circumstance. Most people are going to opt for multiple chargers with single ports, or they're going to opt for a charger with a bunch of ports on it so that they can charge individual batteries so that they don't have to worry about parallel charging. So with that being said, let's get right into the parallel charging aspect, because there is a lot to be told in the parallel charging space. So let me talk about parallel charging boards first, and then we'll talk about maybe the differences, and then we'll go into how I would go about putting batteries on the parallel charging boards, because there is a particular way that I like to do it that I find to be the safest way. And again, we'll go into that in a second. So let's talk about parallel charging boards really quick. This is one version. This is actually made by Lumineer, and these have a bunch of lights and fuses on them. So if you were to plug in a battery that was, say, the wrong cell count or something, or you weren't paying attention, it would just blow one of these little fuses that are fairly common, and you can just slap a new one back in there. I will say that every parallel board is slightly different, and they all have their ups and downs. These having a black balance lead connector is kind of difficult to see sometimes, and it being where it is also, they're all kind of a pain in the butt to plug in. But yeah, you just want to make sure that your parallel board has the connectors that you need. And again, this particular one just has the 6S connector. Yes, we can plug a 2S into it, but it requires a little bit of finagling to make sure you're plugging it in the right way. It is signified by positive and negative, and yes, it does look cleaner with just the 6S because you can plug it in. But remember, as I was doing it over here, it's kind of a pain in the butt because the keys aren't there. Now, over here you have a lot more options. You have 2S all the way up to 6S, and you have 6 of those because you have 6 different batteries that you can plug in, as you can tell by the main connectors, which are XT30s on this board, JSTs on this board, and XT60s on this board. Yes, you can accidentally plug a 2S into a 3S plug. Yes, you can accidentally plug a 4S into a 6S. You can do it wrong. You can do it wrong on both. It just depends on which one you think looks cooler, really. It has no other benefit other than the potential that these have a fuse to save you and these don't. These are super cheap. I would say this board style is going to run you in the $20 to $30 range, maybe even $15, but with inflation, probably not so much. This board was $30 to $40 at one point, but I'm sure now it's in the $50 to $60 range, so it all depends on what you're trying to do. Just make sure you buy the right board for your right application. You make sure if you're running XT60s, you buy an XT60 parallel board. If you're running XT90s, you either make a bunch of adapters to go to XT60s, or you buy an XT90 balance board. If you're running JSTs and you're running 4S, and make sure you got the right connector to go to your charger too. This particular one is a banana connector that works on this charger. However, I would have to make an adapter to make it work on this charger because it's an XT60. So again, I'd have to make something, I don't know. I'd have to make something to make it work, but I don't use this on that. I'll just use it over there. Now, as far as balance connectors and balance plugs are concerned, the board, you just want to make sure that when you're putting the batteries onto the board, we talked briefly about like cell count and capacity. Capacity does not matter. It really matters when it comes to voltage. So that's what we want to make sure we're working with. And I'm going to go over the logistics of how I would go about taking these batteries that I just flown and then distributing them onto the power supplies and getting them charged up. So what I'm going to do is every time I come home, I'm basically going to open my bag. I'm probably not going to try to leave these batteries charged or discharged for a long period of time. And when I say a long period of time, let's say like 2 days. If I'm not going to fly in 2 days and I've got a bunch of charge packs and I flew a bunch of discharge packs, I'm definitely going to go home and try to make sure that within the next day or two, I put those batteries at storage voltage, or if I plan on flying in that next 48-hour period, then I'm going to go ahead and just leave those batteries charged and just say whatever, and I might take the ones that are discharged and put them at a storage voltage, because it's bad to leave the batteries either fully charged or fully discharged. You want to make sure they're at the storage voltage in the middle. Now the voltage range for a lithium polymer battery is 4.2 volts down to about 3.5 volts. Now you don't want to go fully below that or it starts damaging the battery, and you don't want to charge above 4.2 volts, so that'll damage the battery too and potentially cause a fire. That's usually where fires happen. Now the storage voltage is around 3.8 volts per cell. Now there's any range between there, and that's kind of what we're looking at when I come home from flying. I'm going to grab some batteries out of the bag, and I do have them indicated with these little tabs, or sorry, these little plugs here, of which batteries are charged and which batteries maybe aren't charged. I just grabbed these batteries from my battery collection over there, so I don't know the state of them as far as the charge, whether or not there's dead cells or anything. So if I was in a crash and I had a physically damaged battery, maybe I give it a little sniff and see if there's anything sweet smelling. If there is, then maybe I have a damaged cell, and I'm definitely going to check that one. And how I check that is I take my little cell checker here, which is this is ISDT Battery Go cell checker. I'm going to take my balance lead. I'm not worried about the positive or the main power lead right now. I'm only worried about the balance lead. Take the balance lead, plug it in. What I'm looking for here is the overall voltage is 22.9, and I'm just making sure that there's 6 cells and they're all fairly close to each other. These are all at around 3.82 volts per cell, and there's 6 of them, right? So I just want to make sure that there's 6 on there. If I plug it in wrong to the battery charger, sometimes it doesn't work, or sometimes it may show that one cell's gone or whatever. Just make sure you plug it in correctly here and make sure you've got 6 cells. So I'm at 22.9. That's the main number that I'm looking for. I'm going to take my 22.9, I'm going to put it there. Let's go to the next battery. This goes a lot faster when I'm not talking to you guys about it. 22.8. So all of them are very similar. A couple of the cells are a little lower, but it's not that big of a deal. Within 0.02 of a volt per cell. I'm not too worried about that. So again, that one was 22.8. So this one's at 22.48. So this one's a little lower. I'm going to put that one by itself because it's not as close as the others. I just want to make sure I'm within about half a volt. And I'll talk about maybe in the beginning I go a little less, like maybe 0.2 of a volt. But at the end, we'll talk about what's the biggest range you can have when you're charging parallel. So this is 23.1. So again, this one was 22.4 or 22.4, and we can do this. You can put them in kind of a staggered formation so you have an idea. This was a higher one. This was at 23.1, and this was at 22.8, and this was at 22.4. So, you know, if that helps you, you pull these off. Generally, these are dictating that I haven't flown them, but again, I just pulled them from the thing over there, so I don't know. So we got 23.1. Put that one over there with those. Let's go ahead and just dig through all these real quick. 23.1. And usually these indicate that I haven't flown them, but, you know, again, I just put the tab on there because why not? 23.1 still. And let's go ahead and check this one. 23.1. Okay, so we got a bunch of 23.1s, we got a bunch of 22.8s, and we got a 22.4. Why did I separate them like that? And why did I make sure that they all had 6 cells and they were all relatively close to each other? Well, ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to take all of these batteries and we're going to put them onto a parallel board as if they're one big battery. Now, does capacity matter? Could I plug a 1400 and an 1100 together? Can I plug a 6000 and an 1100 together? As long as they're the same voltage and the same cell count, you can. And it's going to charge the big battery based on voltage, so it's going to put more into the big battery until it sees a voltage increase, and then it's going to start charging the smaller battery. If the cell counts are different, aka this is a 4S and this is a 6S, don't do that, because this battery will send extra voltage into this battery, and generally it just fries the board here. It doesn't actually do anything to the battery. But in some cases, it can cause this lower voltage battery to have a problem and potentially cause a fire. So again, you can charge any capacity battery as long as the voltages are the same and all the cells are there and they're the right cell count. Okay, so again, a 1400. How I'm going to do this safely, I'm going to take my balance lead, I'm going to plug it into my balance board. We can go ahead and slip that all the way down in there. We've seen that all 6 battery cells are there. We're going to take our main power lead. I'm going to go ahead and stick this thing in here. Cool, we got one battery on. I checked all these. They're all the same voltage. I've determined these are all the same voltage by kind of grouping them, right? So all of these I can put on this parallel board. So let's put all these guys on this parallel board real quick just to show you. Again, balance lead first, and then main power lead. You don't hear any clicks or snaps, right? There's nothing crazy voltage differences. There's not going to be any snaps. There we go. And all of these are kind of hard at the end here, because these balance leads are kind of short on these batteries. These are prototype batteries. Okay, so I got 5 batteries on a 6 battery setup balance board. Now, if you look on the screen here, we got all 6 cells still there. We got the same voltage as we checked over there, about 23.15. And now, essentially, what this charger sees is it sees 1 battery. It doesn't care that there's 5 plugged in. I could technically take these batteries right here, which let's just go ahead and do it just to be crazy. I could technically plug these in because they're 23.2 volts as well. I could technically do this and daisy chain balance boards together. I'm not advocating for this. I'm just showing you, as long as the voltages are the same in the batteries and they're all equal, they don't care, and the charger doesn't know any different. So now that I've got all of these batteries plugged in together, I'm going to add up all of the capacities and get myself an understanding of what 1C looks like. Now, an easy way to do that is just kind of guess. Say each one of these batteries is, they're all different capacities. There's 1400s and 1600s and 1100s. So I'm just going to say there's 2, 4, 6, 8 batteries, and let's just say they're roughly around 1300 because that's kind of the middle ground. So whatever, 8 batteries times 1300, that gets me right around like 10.5-ish. So let's say 10.5 amps is my 1C rating for charge for this particular setup with these 8 batteries in parallel. Again, I didn't change the voltages. All the voltages are the same. They're all right around 23.15. The capacity is what we're talking about here. We're talking about how many amp hours is this one massive battery that you see as a bunch of batteries, but you just want to think of it as one big battery. How much is that? And that's going to take 45 minutes to charge if I do it at 1C. Now, this particular charger can handle a lot more output power. So I could technically charge this at 20 amps, this one setup here, and it would only be charging this batteries a little under 2C, so it would take about 30 minutes, and it would charge all of them. So all these batteries would be charged in about 30 minutes, and it would only be at 2C, which is relatively safe. Most people charge at 2 to 3C all the time on these smaller chargers. They're just doing it individually. So if you think of it like this, yes, you can charge at 1C if you want to be super safe. You can charge at 2C, you can charge at 3C. You could charge at 30 amps and get these batteries charged up in about 25 minutes. However, generally when I'm charging in parallel, I just charge at 1C. That's just kind of the standard practice. I've been doing this for like over 10 years now. I haven't had any problems. As long as you just make sure your batteries are equal and you plug them into the right balance board, you make sure you plug in the balance lead first, everything's good. I just go over here and set it to 1C. So in this particular instance, like I said, we're going to do about 10.5 amps because I just generally did some basic math, and I said I got 8 batteries at about 1300 milliamps a piece. If you wanted to add them up all specifically, a 1600 and a 1400 and a 1600 and a 1400, and then 2 4400s, so that's like 10.4 amps total. So we could go exactly to 1C. And then I want to make sure that I'm balance charging, and it's user balance, just because, I don't know, I charge mine a little differently. I don't even remember. I did that like 10 years ago, but it's just user balance. Auto cell count, it says there, it sees there's 6 cells. You could set it to 6 if you really wanted to. Mine's just set to auto, so it auto does it. And then the capacity I want to ignore because I just want it to charge to maximum voltage, which ideally would give me the maximum capacity for all of these batteries. So I'm just going to ignore the capacity, roll down to start. I'm going to hit start. Are you sure? Yes. Now these batteries are charging at 10.4 amps. It'll ramp up here in a second. And that is equivalent to me charging each one of these batteries at 1C, but instead I'm doing it as a giant group. So I'm essentially saving myself a bunch of time by doing a little bit of forethought and a little bit of math and understanding how to set up these batteries. Now, the downside to parallel charging is if you have a bunch of separate batteries that are at different charge levels. So say you had one at like 22 volts and 23 volts and 24.5 and 25. All of these, you could have all these batteries, but you're not going to be able to parallel charge them. So that's kind of when the individual battery ports comes in handy. And the reason you might have staggered batteries like that is, say you go out and you're flying and you're crashing and you don't finish the battery, and you go out and you fly for a minute and you crash, you go out and fly for 30 seconds, you crash, you go out and fly for 2 minutes and you crash. That's when you have those differentiations in battery voltage. And that's something that you need to take into consideration in your flying style. Does your flying style aid towards, hey, I come back with most of my batteries all around the same voltage? Or does my flying style indicate that I'm going to come home with a bunch of different batteries and they're all going to be, you know, whatever at different voltages? The other thing is how many batteries do you have? Do you have 10 plus batteries that you're charging on a regular basis, or do you only have 2? If you only have 2, then you just need one of these chargers and you'll be good to go. But just realize that you're going to be running these batteries back to back to back to back to back, and you're not going to be able to get as much flying time because you're going to spend a lot of that time charging. And if you're charging them quickly at like 3 or 4C, you're going to be degrading the life of the battery overall. Now, if you're a newer pilot and you're crashing a bunch and you're killing a bunch of batteries, does it matter that I'm degrading the life of the battery? Probably not. But I fly batteries for like over a year at sometimes. These are 2 or 3 years old at this point. This is from 2023, from May of 2023. So these batteries get used a long period of time, and I usually do actually write on the back of when I started flying them. So this battery is actually 10 of 21. So this is an October of 21 battery, and it's still in good working order because I store it at 3.8 volts per cell, which is right around 23 volts. Again, if you're not going to fly them for about more than 2 days, then I would go ahead and put your things at storage voltage. You can either discharge them or you can charge them up. So if they're too low, say all these batteries were at 22 volts, I would just go in here and I would say, all right, I'm going to put them all in parallel, but I'm going to do storage voltage. And it's going to charge them as if they're all one big battery to storage voltage. So they're a little over storage voltage right now because I charged them a tiny bit since we just did that. Now it's going to discharge them and turn all that energy that we put in here into heat. So it's negative 3 amps right now. It's literally just sucking amperage out of these batteries and bringing them back down to 23 point whatever 0 volts, so that I'm at a storage voltage. So as far as parallel charging is concerned, again, you want to make sure that you're within about half a volt of the battery that you're plugging in together. With the smaller batteries, I'm not as concerned. If this is like 7.5 volts and I have another one at 7.8 or 9 or 7.9, I'm going to just plug that thing in just because it's small. It's not necessarily like less of a fire risk, but again, that 0.5 of a volt is kind of my like safety margin. I have plugged in batteries that were significantly different. Like this might be at 24 and this might be at 22.9. I have done that and I haven't had any issues personally, but I don't advise that. Like 0.5 volts is generally the rule of thumb for parallel charging, at least for me. And there may be some sticklers out there that say, hey, don't do anything other than 0.02 volts, or 0.2 volts is probably the actual safest one. But yeah, 0.5 is kind of generally my rule of thumb. And you want to make sure that your batteries aren't damaged, that they're at the right voltage, and that you have at least calculated somewhat the amount of battery capacity that you have so that you charge at the right amount. If you can do all 3 of those things, then you will have success parallel charging. Now, would I be able to charge this many batteries on a small charger like this? Probably not, because it can't do 10 amps out. So I would probably just run one side at 3 amps for this, and the other side at maybe 5 or 6. I'm charging the same amount of batteries because I've got 2 different ports, and I could potentially have them at different voltages. Say this group of batteries was at 23, and this group of batteries was at 24. I could have 2 different parallel boards and be charging them in parallel while they're charging separately, if that makes sense. You're parallel charging, but you're doing it separately into 2 different ports. Hopefully that was some information you guys were wanting. I know there's been a lot of people asking me about parallel charging and battery setups and whatnot. If you have any comments or questions, you can put them in the comment section below. If you think I'm completely crazy and why am I parallel charging this bomb next to my face, you can also comment on that. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, because it does help YouTube algorithm, even though I don't really make any money off of YouTube, but it is kind of cool to get more views. And thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions or you want to see other videos about batteries, or just any other topics, you can put it in the comment section. I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much. And no, I didn't take crack. I just have done this video a bunch of times, and I'm really fluid at it now. So thank you for watching.